Okay, this is the managing a change process, and in the managing change process is culture, leadership, mergers, corporate plan, hunches or scientific decision making, and managing the whole change process. So I've got all this behind me on the board, but I've also got a question, and the question is this, do you think that resistance from employees is likely to be the biggest problem that a firm faces when it wants to reinvent itself? So the biggest problem. So you've got to really focus on those words. And if you don't focus on those words, forget your A-level, okay? The biggest problem. Well, what sort of problems will a firm face if it's trying to reinvent itself? Well, one is with the employees, and people do not like change, so you can go through all of that, number one. The second thing is, has the firm got enough finance? Okay, that's another issue. The next one is, what about all the competitors that you're actually dealing with? So, for example, if we use a UK example right now, we're looking at Tesco's, okay? So Tesco's is going to have to have a big change, going to have to get rid of people, number one, so the employees are going to be very happy. It's also got to do with Aldi, the threat of Aldi. How on earth can it compete with Aldi? It's going to be very, very difficult. And it also needs a lot of finance to do something different that allows it to grow in the future. So this is the same as any firm. It's constantly faced with the fact that it needs to make decisions. It's almost easier once you're growing and once you first start out, because there's that energy and you know what you're going to do. But what you do now with Tesco's, which is a bit of a big beast and it's been very successful in the past, what's it going to do now to reinvent itself? And so lots of firms have this problem. Marks and Spencer's would have the same sort of issues, or British Airways. You're trying to change these juggernauts in the face of your competition. So, is this the biggest problem? Well, I'll say I will go through a number of problems. It may be research and development, it may be finance, it may be resistance from employees, it may be your competitors, it may be innovation, it may be any of those things. So all those are problems. And then you're trying to think of firms, and the firm that I would definitely think of would be Nokia, or a firm that didn't adapt to the changing marketplace. It missed out in terms of the touchscreen technology, which it already got, and it missed out on the sort of iPad technology. I'm no technology expert, by the way, so therefore it fell behind. So that is certainly one firm that you could be talking about. But what about great big firms? What about Toyota? Okay, so Toyota has been incredibly successful with its lean production system, Keiretsu with its suppliers. It's got a great product, great reputation. But what happens then when Daihatsu and Kia come along and can produce lower cost models of those cars? So therefore, that's also going to have to change. Now, it will have a lot of money behind it, but even so, it still has to make moves. So there's going to be lots of changes that firm needs to make, Toyota, with the new competition from Daihatsu and Kia. So we've already got two firms in here that we can then start to talk about. But think of other firms that have had problems, things like Cobra Beer. Now, when a firm tries to reinvent its brand or whatever, or tries to take its brand to new markets, for them, resistance from employees probably isn't too much of a problem, simply because the firm has been incredibly successful, so all the employees are going to be with it, and it's not so big. However, when it's moving into those new markets, probably the biggest problem that they faced, well, it definitely was the biggest problem they faced in 2008, clearly was finance. What about the Virgin brand? Would we expect them to have the biggest problem? In a sense, maybe not, because of the whole way in which the firm is structured. So it may not be resistance from employees, because the workers tend to be theory-wide type workers. They tend to be adaptable to change. The very business model is different from any other firm, so maybe it's not so much a problem for them. So what I'm really trying to say is, okay, there's lots that we can talk about, but we must focus on that term. Is this the biggest problem? Okay, is it the biggest problem? So, then let's have a look at all these different firms on here. So we've got mergers on here, okay? Well, actually, when a firm merges together, one of the biggest problems that you face is the fact that the people in those places may have a different culture. If they have a different culture, like with Daimler and Chrysler, that model did not work because Chrysler had an entrepreneurial culture and Daimler had a methodical culture. Okay, so from that point of view, workers was the biggest problem. But there's also going to be a finance issue when you're taking over another firm. Resistance from employees, well, maybe if you have a fantastic corporate plan that all the stakeholders can see, then maybe the resistance of employees will be less. Maybe in terms of the leadership, you've got a fantastic leader, Steve Jobs, power culture, he changed around the whole firm, sets up a clear vision for the whole organisation, people buy into it, because it's been there previously, so in that case, it may not be the biggest problem. So great leaders will tend to have less resistance from employees. It also depends on what sort of culture that you're trying to change. So if you look at the banking system, which originally had a toxic culture, and you're now trying to change it to a task and even an ethical culture, then it may be easier to change the way in which that firm works. Managing, and then also if you manage the change process well. So you set a clear vision, you have great project teams, you communicate to them, you empower the workforce, you tell them what's going on, you've got a lot of money behind the whole idea, then it may well be able to change the whole dynamics of the organisation. So you can have a really nice essay. Now really this essay covers most, we haven't got hunches and scientific decision making, really this whole essay covers most of this part of the course. And you can use lots of examples from that. Remember to do this. You must always analyse individual points you're making. So you make points, right? You explain them and then you evaluate that point. So do you think the resistance is the biggest problem? Right? Then what we'll do is after this session we'll have a quick go at that essay just to show you how I developed that in the second part of this lecture. Thank you very much. So this is an overview of the whole course, mergers, culture, leadership, corporate plan, hunch or scientific decision making, and how you manage that change process. So you come up into the exam, they talk about Samsung, the firm. Do you think the resistance from employees is likely to be the biggest problem? Right, okay, you must focus on those words, as I've just said. Is it the biggest problem? Well, problems I've got, well, finance could be a problem, obviously. Your competitors could be a problem. Maybe they come up with a new market. I just previously used the example of Aldi, and maybe there isn't enough research and development. So it's not going to be the biggest problem. It's certainly a big problem, and we know that because when you try and change a firm's culture, employees happen to be the biggest problem in that process. Okay, so change the culture of any business is going to be difficult. Depends how far that culture is moving. If it's from a task culture to maybe an entrepreneurial culture, then maybe that's not too much of a move. Okay, but e.g., for example, Daimler Chrysler, resistance from employees was the biggest problem that they faced. And the reason why that was because Daimler had a methodical culture, Chrysler had an entrepreneurial culture. If we were to look at the banks, we tried to move from a toxic culture or a casino culture and making a lot of money culture to one that is more ethical. Now that is extremely difficult to impose on. You've still got to run a business that makes money. Trying to change Woolworths around, well, that was a problem with finance. You didn't have enough finance to update the stores. Nokia was partially a problem with finance, partly a problem of management, but also a problem of resistance for employees when Stephen Elop came along and tried to change them around. They're eventually brought out, obviously, by Microsoft. Kraft Cadbury. Kraft, an American company, Cadbury, strong on corporate social responsibility. That's a big change for those employees. Virgin, maybe less so because of the very nature of the business. Steve Jobs, Apple succeeded in turning a company around, and Tata, JLR, they managed their change process well. So in the intro, I want a big discussion of that question. Okay, next bit is point, explain, evaluate. Point one, managing the change process. The theory behind that is you must sell them a vision, then you must train the staff, you must communicate with them at all times. If it's a changing from a theory X to a theory Y culture, you've got to recognise that process is going to be very difficult. Communicate, get some project leaders in who enthuse with the project, consolidate gains. Okay, but also be aware of Lewin's force field analysis model and the fact if you write a great big corporate plan, you disseminate that to all the workers and they're more likely to be for the change process. Steve Jobs did it with Apple. It was loss-making, made it into a profit-making company, but he had a very clear vision about what he wanted to do, and he's certainly the technical expertise to continue with that. For Willie Walsh and British Airways, that whole process has been far much more difficult. So yes, if you use the managing change process, then it is possible to change an organisation around, but you've got to have very good leadership in there. Okay, point one done. Okay, point two, yes, but you also need enough finance, e.g. Marks & Spencer's, Morrison Safeway, Cobra Beer, Tesco. They're all now going to need a lot of finance because they're going to have to maybe change their business model. So maybe they're going to have to go more at market or bring out more designs or whatever. Now that's going to cost them a lot of money, and so finance is also an issue. When you redevelop any brand, that's what you need to do. Okay, finance done. Is it the biggest problem? Maybe for these firms, maybe having enough money is. Maybe they know what to do, but they haven't got enough money to do that. The technology market is obviously hugely significant here because technology is always changing. So therefore REM, which was doing very well, and Nokia have both gone by the wayside because you've got to be at the forefront of technology to make a change. However, once you do adapt to the technology, then you like to create large amounts of money. So therefore that becomes less of an issue. So once you create an entrepreneurial culture, then it's easier for you to change in terms of what you want to do. Nokia obviously found it very, very difficult to change. Okay, another problem is, right, maybe you want to diversify, and that's also a problem because you've got to bring out a new product, research development, and you've also got to enter a new market. Now Tata and JLR have succeeded in this, even though it's a big problem because when Tata brought JLR, they essentially kept JLR as it was, but then transferred that idea into the emerging markets. So the point is, yes, diversification is also another big problem because you've got to learn about a new market. However, if you do lots of good research, then you can learn more about that market. And clearly, Tata JLR succeeded in this market, which is the analysis. Why do they succeed? Great branding. They were able to charge high gross margins. First mover advantage into that market with a car that was branded, which is a brand by Victoria Beckham. Okay, so that's possible. So then your evaluation is, well, there are lots of problems, and resistance from employees is obviously a big problem, as shown by these cases. But also, maybe if you have lots of finance and a great leader, then that problem is less of an issue. Okay? So you must attack the question on the points, on the paragraphs, points, explain, evaluate. Then when you get to the end, you make an evaluation in terms of all the different problems in there, and you're going to get an A-star grade. Congratulations. Delighted to be talking to you. Have a nice day.